Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, April 16, 2012. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee. I'm joined by Council Members Bill Rosendahl and Paul Koretz, and we're going to get started. It's now 10 minutes after 2, and we'll begin with general public comment. Following general public comment, we'll be retiring to closed session to hear 2 items, and then we'll proceed with our regular agenda. So let's begin with general public comment, and as of right now, the only card I have is Dr. Weissman's, but if anyone else would like to offer general public comment on an item not on today's agenda, please fill out one of these cards and bring it forward before Dr. Weissman concludes. Dr. Weissman, welcome.
Good afternoon, sir, and members of the committee. I'm here a little officially this afternoon as a budget advocate. You council members were there on Wednesday morning when the budget advocates presented their white paper to your council, and that was led by Mr. Heinrich Kiefer, our vice chair. As a matter of fact, he's our secretary. Our president had pneumococcal pneumonia and is now recovering. He's over in another meeting right now, but he's feeling just fine, thank you. But the meeting then, I thought, went very well. I hope you found our offering to your council to your liking. And again, you've seen the 21 recommendations. I've left you with copies of the document, which I believe, if I know the 3 of you, you've already gotten started into it. And I'll commend to you the back pages, the discussion of the audits that were done by the city controller. I'm a little behind because she keeps coming out with more and more of them, and I'll try to add them as time goes on. This is a living document. It will be advanced and increased as time goes on. I'm hoping to make this a regular interaction with the Budget and Finance Committee, and I hope we can create some kind of a status between us that will make this a formal kind of relationship between the budget advocates and the Budget and Finance Committee. One thing I'd like to ask as a question, if I may. I think I have seen something of the schedule for when the actual mayor's proposal will be reviewed by first Budget and Finance and then, of course, sent on to City Council. I saw dates that don't even start until May, and I remember how it was done in the past. I don't know if there's a different schedule this year, but if you could advise me on that, I'd appreciate it.
I'll be happy to have my staff go over the schedule with you.
We'd appreciate it, and we will make it as public as you wish it to be, but I believe it should be something known to a lot of people, because I'm hoping to muster a lot of folks to be there with you and help with that process.
Thank you, and very much appreciate the thorough work that the budget advocates did on their report, so thank you very much for that.
Thank you, sir.
We're now joined by Councilmember Englander as well, and seeing no further general public comment, we can close general public comment at this time and proceed to our closed session.
I was going to, may I offer, I believe item 10, Office of Finance has indicated that can be received and filed, and so if you want to deal with that matter and just take that recommendation, we can address it and get rid of it.
We're joined by the Honorable Tony Cardenas as well, so we've got a full contingent. Well, but the day is young, Mr. Cardenas. The day is young. Without any objection, I think we can deal with number 10 as a consent item to receive and file.
Move the item.
Okay.
Okay.
That'll be the action of the committee.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Now,
so we'll adjourn to the back room for the closed session items.
If you could read them out.
Okay, so the item 1 is basically a city attorney report relative to a settlement discussion in a case entitled Communities Actively Living Independent and Free versus City of Los Angeles. And item 2 is a CEO report relative to settlement discussion in a case entitled Kathleen Washington versus City of Los Angeles.
All right. We'll be right back. Is there any public comment on either of those 2 closed session items? I don't have any cards. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close public comment on those items.
Okay. Item 3 was continued from our February 27th meeting. It's a motion requesting the city attorney to prepare an ordinance amending the Los Angeles Municipal Code relative to the city's parking occupancy tax to include commissaries in the list of exempted parking facilities.
All right, thank you. This is a continued matter, but we do have a couple of cards on it. We'll go ahead and take that comment, and then we can have additional discussion if you would like to do so, although we did have a fairly robust discussion about this item before. So let's hear first from Seth Bradbury, and then Philip Greenwald, if they're there. Mr. Bradbury? Welcome.
I work at Eagle Foods, which is a commissary in Sun Valley, California, and we were audited by the city, and they found us to be a parking lot. We have lunch trucks. They're at our place. How we charge them is a service charge. We give them electricity. We give them ice. We give them, they can dump their garbage there. They can dump their used grease, et cetera, et cetera. We don't charge for parking, never have. Don't allow any vehicles anybody to park their car on our lot, never have. It's either a lunch truck or nothing, which is by health code, LA County Health Code laws. And it's just, a parking lot to me is like when I go to a Laker game, I park my car there. Boom. That's all I gotta say.
All right, thank you. Mr. Greenwald.
Thank you, sir. Members of the committee, my name is Phil Greenwald, and I'm an attorney of 49 years. I'm not bragging, I'm just reporting. And over those 49 years, I've appeared before sessions of the city council because of my representation of catering trucks for 45 of those 49 years. I've never had the pleasure of appearing before a committee. Usually it's before the council as a whole. Let me just say this. In 1990, when the parking occupancy tax ordinance was adopted, they never had in mind to consider commissaries that service catering trucks as being parking lots, and they aren't parking lots. For 17 plus years, no one from the city ever came to a commissary, and I've represented virtually all the commissaries in this city at one time or another. At the present time, I'm representing 3 out of 5. Nobody has ever said in that period of time that a commissary was a parking lot. They service catering trucks, provide services to the catering trucks pursuant to the Health and Safety Code. The catering trucks are required daily to be serviced at an approved commissary under the health laws. There is no doubt in my mind that many of you go from time to time to Ralph's Market or to other markets where you park your vehicles. You go to your banks and you park your vehicles and you don't pay a parking fee. The commissaries, just like those facilities that I just mentioned, make a complement or complimentary parking available for the servicing of these catering trucks. May I have a couple of more moments?
Just finish up your thought.
I will
We have a
indeed.
very heavy agenda, and we've already heard
I will
testimony
indeed.
about this item.
They don't charge anything for the parking of vehicles. They charge for services that are provided.
Okay.
And I think that it's perfectly appropriate that there be an exemption in writing henceforth if not retroactively, henceforth at least, for commissaries. Thank you very much.
All right.
Unless you have a question,
Thank you very much. I doubt that anyone has any questions at this point. We did discuss this matter extensively at the last, or at a previous meeting. Colleagues, if there's no further discussion, I'm going to move that we approve the motion and advance it to council. We're currently not realizing any revenues from collecting a parking occupancy tax on these facilities. It makes sense to me, as I explained at great length last time, that when you don't have a situation where parking is being paid by the hour, these are being serviced, it makes sense just as a matter of fairness without any fiscal consequence that we should provide for that exemption in the ordinance. So that would be my motion. And in fact, that's what we're going to That's what the committee is, one way or the other, going to do. But I'm happy to take a vote on the matter. And I preferred that Mr. Cardenas was here, but all in favor of advancing it? Aye.
Nay.
So that will advance 3-1 with Mr. Cardenas not here. So thank you very much. That brings us to...
takes us to items 4 and 5.
And colleagues, I was thinking that if you have questions on 4 and 5, we can have the report. Otherwise,
Just for the committee's information, item 4 was Office of Finance report relative to investment report for the month ending January 31st, and 5 is the month ending February 29th.
and we don't have any cards on those matters, so colleagues, if you have questions?
Which item?
4 and 5?
4 and 5, these are Office of Finance investment reports for January and February.
Okay. Mr. Kratz, anything on this one? All right, seeing no questions, I guess we can move that forward. Both recommendations, I guess we will be
Recommendation to note and file both reports.
noting and filing or receiving and filing?
Note and file.
Note and file those? Okay. That'll be the unanimous action of the committee. Thanks very much for staying. Sorry. All right, that brings us to item 6.
Item number 6. And item 6 is a city administrative officer report relative to the 4-year budget outlook and update to the 3-year plan to fiscal sustainability.
Now, we have quite a number of cards on this. What I think would be most effective is if we hear from the CAO first, then we'll take the cards, and then we'll begin our discussion, if that works for all of you. Mr. Santana, welcome.
Good afternoon, Miguel Santana, CAO. I'm recovering from a cold, so I apologize if I'm a little nasally.
Okay.
So, as part of the charter specifically gives the CAO the authority to present reports to your council and to the mayor on the status of the city's finances, as well as recommendations on how to proceed based on the fiscal reality that the city's facing. And so, 3 years ago when I first arrived, when we were in the middle of our fiscal crisis, we took an opportunity to provide a report to your council that looked at not just as the immediate issue, which was deteriorating rapidly, but also try to identify a long-term solution so that the city would be out of this constant crisis mode. And through that, it laid out a framework for a number of initiatives that we've been able to propose to the council, some of which have been achieved and others that are still in the works, and some have been taken off the table altogether. What this report it provides is two things. One, it gives you an update on our fiscal health for the next year and for the next few years. And second, it lays out, in our view, a framework of solutions that could be pursued, not to be dealt with all at once or in 1 year, but really as a framework for the next few years. Our ultimate goal is to be in the kind of fiscal health where we're not working month by month, week by week, year by year. When we're in fact engaged in the kind of financial planning that we could start investing in our people, start investing in our infrastructure, and ultimately provide enhanced services to the residents of Los Angeles. There's a PowerPoint that basically is a summary of all the charts in our report that I'll quickly go through and then be happy to respond to any questions. So what we lay out are sort of a reminder of what the four principles are that we had originally proposed, and add in an additional one related to revenue. We provide an outlook of what our structural deficit looks like. We recommend that ultimately the only way out of our fiscal crisis is both by increasing our revenue and by reducing our expenditures. There isn't one single solution, one single strategy that ultimately will get us to financial sustainability. It's going to be the collection of a number of different areas, including new revenue, that ultimately will get us there. We recommend building on the successes that we've already achieved and then laying out a path forward. So on slide number 3, we specifically talk about what those 5 strategies are. And these 5 strategies, if you were to look back at the work of my office over the last 3 years, most things that we do tie back to this strategic plan that we outlined. The first is basic responsible fiscal management. And with that, the cornerstone of that is a healthy reserve fund. The city, over a period of the last several years, has maintained a reserve fund that has fluctuated. As a policy, we have a commitment to have a reserve fund of 5%. We've only been able to hit that percentage once. A reserve fund is what rating agencies look at, is what investors look at to determine exactly, if you look on page 16, the fluctuation in our reserve fund over the last several years. And so we are recommending that your council reaffirm its commitment to a 5% reserve fund. And beyond that, start expanding on the second reserve to manage all the uncertainty and all the various cases that we know are floating out there. There are a number of cases of which you discuss in closed session on a regular basis that really require us to have the kind of funds that we could begin to utilize when these cases come to closure. The Ardon case is the one that you've heard me talk about before. That's on our utility tax. Under the worst case scenario, if we were to lose that case, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $750 million, so one-time hit to the city. If we were to cover that through basic judgment obligation bond, the annual payments for that could go as high as $100 million a year. And so without the ability to address that, there would be a significant impact on our ability to maintain the current level of funding. So this is beyond the basic reserve that we need to have. If you look at our sister organizations, LAUSD, which is arguably even in facing a harder financial situation than we are, they have maintained a healthy reserve fund of well over 5% consistently over the last several years. LA County has a reserve fund of 10%. And what they do is once they hit that 10%, any overage that comes of new revenue, they use for one-time expenditures to invest in our capital, so that they don't rely on those new revenues that come up and down based on the economy to build new program, because those revenues are likely to disappear under the next recession. The second area in terms of our guiding principle is really to continue this effort to evaluate our core services. and have the difficult discussion of ultimately what is that the city is only a city can do. And for those things that only we can do, find better ways to engage in those activities. We shouldn't be afraid to examine the way we do business. We shouldn't be afraid to commission studies that look at the way we do business. And from those studies and from that analysis, either we reaffirm the way we engage in those activities or we come up with new ideas. And we lay out a number of recommendations of where that could be done. We also recommend that we start aligning core services throughout departments, and I think your support for the consolidation of human resources throughout the city is a major step in that regard that council has approved. But we also look at areas like accounting that are functions that, regardless of what kind of city we have to maintain a function that is strong throughout the city. The third area is, of course, alternative service delivery models. There is ultimately what residents expect from our city is an array of services that they have access to, whether it's a cultural center, a theater that we may run, or even a zoo. They support those services that provide access to recreational and various services for them and their families. One of the things that we're proposing that we've continued to put on the table is that we examine ways to partner with both nonprofit organizations as well as for-profit organizations to ensure that those services get maintained, but under a different model. It doesn't necessarily mean that the city gets out of the business of providing those services. What it means that we provide it in a different way. And what that does is in two things. Number one, it ensures that that service maintains in the middle of a fiscal crisis, which we're expected to see over the next several years, by sharing the risks with somebody else. Right now, we hold 100% of the risk for the zoo as an example. And if we were to partner with a nonprofit or a foundation who would be obligated through a contract to raise so much funding on an annual basis, we're able to maintain that service for the public, which is ultimately what their expectation is. The second thing it does, it relieves pressure on the rest of the system, so that each year when we're competing for scarce resources and we're making the difficult task of deciding what functions to eliminate, what positions to eliminate, by reducing the things that we're 100% responsible for and sharing that risk with someone else, then it allows us then to focus on what is in fact things that only us as the City of Los Angeles can do, and allows us to then protect those services in a greater degree, because we're limiting our ability to be spread out so much that we can't achieve all of our goals. The fourth area is maintaining a sustainable workforce. And that simply means having a workforce that we could afford. And by afford, it doesn't mean that we're constantly putting our employees at the risk of layoffs and furloughs. Ultimately, a successful 3-year plan at the end of that process ensures stability for our own employees. And that is something we have not been able to provide over the last 3 years because of the fiscal crisis that we've been in. And so everything from our compensation structure to our pension system to what we provide in health care, all of those things need to be looked at in a way that ensures sustainability for the long term. And then finally, a new proposal that we have is looking at revenue. And there's two ways of doing that. The first is, of course, by raising new revenue. And as unfortunately in the state of California, we're limited in our capacity to impose new taxes or even expand the ones that we currently have. We have to go to the voters. And so we have to make the case that the risk is so high to continue the level of services that we provide that without new revenue, we're likely to reduce the size of our government even further and start deteriorating the network and infrastructure that we currently have. And I believe, based on the projections that we have in the future, we are not going to be able to maintain the current level of services that we have today without a major new revenue source sometime in the next 24 months. It's going to be increasingly difficult. We have cut the city down to the bone.
What ideas do you have on us for doing this?
So the two proposals that we have on revenue is, one, doubling the documentary transfer tax. The documentary transfer tax is what you pay when you buy your home. And most people, when they pay it, don't even know that they pay for it because it gets amortized over the period.
We take on it now.
And so currently, you pay $4.50. We recommend doubling that. And what that would then do, it would allow us to have $100 million of new revenue. The reason we specifically identify this tax versus sales tax or hotel occupancy tax is because currently the value of properties are at one of the lowest points. And so this is really the base of what that tax will look like. By doubling it, we increase that capacity by another $100 million. And so any growth beyond what we currently have after it's doubled is growth that can be invested in infrastructure and one-time obligations because it's beyond what the base is. And so we will recommend doing that. In addition to that, we also recommend increasing the parking tax from 10% to 5%. From 10% to 15%. And then in the other area of revenue, as many people have argued, and that we have to continue our efforts to improve on our collections and uncollected debt. And we do so by establishing realistic goals, implementing the recommendations that have been laid out by the various committees and the controller and the core group, and tracking that in an aggressive manner. So instead of going through the rest of the PowerPoint, I'll just close by focusing on page number 5, which really talks about what our future looks like. The deficit that we're projecting today for fiscal year 12-13 is $222 million. Now, the final deficit that will be included in the budget will be released in the mayor's budget, so I'll just give you a precursor that this number is likely to increase slightly based on new information that we received from our county assessor, several days ago. The following year, we're expecting a deficit at 342, and then 14-15, we're expecting it to grow to 427. Now, what is creating this deficit? It's two basic things. Our revenue is growing by 2.3% over the next 4 years. That assumes that the economy continues to grow modestly. And you can speak to every economist in Southern California and on a national stage, and most would agree that our economy is going to improve modestly over the next few years. This recovery is going to take a very, very long time. And so a 2.3% revenue increase is a fair increase in light of that. However, in the 4 areas that drive our cost, in our pension cost, on our employee compensation, and our healthcare cost, and our workers' comp cost, in those 4 areas alone, the growth rate is 4.7%. on an annual basis. So your revenue is growing by 2.3, and in your 4 largest areas of growth is growing by 4.7%. So until those 2 lines meet, by a reduction in your expenditures and an increase in your revenues, we're going to constantly face a structural deficit. And so it is from that perspective that we lay out this strategy and this plan. Now, ultimately, this is a proposal. It lays out a framework. What I would argue that the cities, as a city family, including the mayor and the council, that if this proposal is not the one that ultimately is the one that we feel comfortable supporting, that a new proposal be put together. But at the end of the day, we need to continue having a strategic plan for the city, a roadmap to get us out of the constant crisis mode that we've been facing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Santana. I'd like to now hear from the public speakers on this matter. And if you haven't already filled out a card, please fill one out and bring it forward. Our first speaker is Cheryl Parisi, followed by Julie Butcher. Ms. Parisi, welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you. There have been cards submitted by a variety of Coalition of LA City Union representatives who will speak to different points in the report. So let me just begin by commenting generally and then specifically on some of the specific issues related to labor. Miguel began his presentation by invoking an idea, a concept of building on the successes we have already achieved. The successes that have already been achieved in managing the budget crisis over the last several years have been ideas that were generated and then moved through the tenacity of the Coalition of LA City Unions and its workers, who want more than anything else a stable employer, a stable city, who continues to provide the level of service that they as city employees are proud of and want to continue. And so as a result of this partnership over the last few years, we generated over $850 million in savings. And specifically, I know I have a brief time period, I want to just talk generally about some of the features of this. We have generated over $400 million in payroll savings alone. Through the early retirement program, which we drove and then paid for, we reduced the city workforce by 2,400, and then through transfers to to special fund positions and a hiring freeze, have reduced the civilian workforce by 4,900 positions. We proactively sought reforms to our pension system. So for the first time, city employees now contribute 4% of their wages to cover pensions. And we have managed, through the Joint Labor Management Benefits Committee, we have managed civilian benefits in a manner that is unprecedented. The anticipated increases of those benefits were anywhere from 6 to 12% a year. Over the last 4-year period, civilian benefit increases have averaged 1.6%. It is a record of success. And so I would ask you to continue with the partnership with organized labor, with LA working families, and reject a set of proposals which seeks to sever that relationship, to stomp on that relationship, and to turn its back on the working families of the city of Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Julie Butcher, followed by Charlie Menz.
So when the CAO's report talks about solutions and opportunities and yet seeks to solely bash the services done by the lowest paid workers in the city, it makes it really difficult to continue to partner. For instance, rather than work and figure out how to remove obstacles, red tape, and make the, for instance, zoo much more sustainable as a municipal entity, the CAO would argue that the only solution is to offshore it, outsource it, and replace the workers with lower paid folks, assuming that the animals will be best taken care of in that way. Pages 37 through 45 of the report the CAO has prepared talks about eliminating jobs done by members of SEIU exclusively. So for instance, a study was done of the fleet operations in the city several years ago, actually several years ago, several years before that, and several years before that, every time showing that the city's mechanics not only perform the services that we need them to do more cost effectively, but also better, and that there would be in fact no savings, and in fact it could cost more to contract out that work. And yet here it is again. Similarly, custodians in this building, the custodians that clean your restrooms, do it at 2 to 3 cents per square foot cheaper than the private sector. So again, rather than accepting the outreached hand of sacrifice that your employees have offered, the CAO comes with a report that bashes their service and then asks them to come up with more. The answer to that from the point of view of the workers is absolutely no.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Charlie Mims, followed by Roy Stone.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, council members. My name is Charlie Mims. I represent the Los Angeles Professional Managers Association, who represent the civilian managers in the city of Los Angeles. Just a general statement. There's about 35 recommendations in the CAO's report. We really feel that these deserve full attention, and that instead of any overall plan being pushed through the city council, that each one of these recommendations comes back to be vetted out in the appropriate council committees. Just a couple of comments on specifics. The 5% reserve fund is a laudable goal, and it's something that if the 5% number appears to be the one that's we would like to meet long term, should be worked toward, but we believe it should be worked toward in an incremental way, as to avoid service reductions that's going to impact the public even more than we have in the past. A comment on the, and I know there'll be other comments on this, but regarding the idea of moving the OPS over to the police department, we've had experience with the police department in their core functions. They do a great job in their core function areas in fighting crime and investigating major crimes and keeping the city safe. But their core function is not checking in public parks and securitizing public buildings. That's why OPS was created, to make sure that those services are provided. They're on the public safety spectrum, they're sort of a lower level service. The LAPD is not going to prioritize activities in public parks that are going to be on a lower level of crime prevention. They're going to go after the major crimes. That's their core mission. You can see that in the example of the traffic officers that used to be part of the LAPD. Traffic was not a core mission of the LAPD. They did a poor job managing that. They got transferred over to the Department of Transportation. Revenue from tickets increased dramatically in conjunction with the Union Labor Management Committee ideas. So we really think that these departments should focus on their core missions as opposed to getting off into peripheral areas. So thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Roy Stone, followed by Bruce Francis.
Hi, I'm Roy Stone, President of the Librarians Guild. I urge you to look very carefully at this report and to follow the suggestion that Charlie just did about, or just gave you, about bringing each aspect of it back. We're not a business. Contracting out is not cost effective. It is not good for service. And we need you to look at that whole aspect of so many aspects of this contracting out. The issue that faces parks and libraries in the consolidation, which we don't think is another efficiency, means that when we call about problem patrons who might have a homeless person who maybe is not following the rules, is LAPD going to come and solve that situation? OPS officers know their communities. They know how to deal with people pleasantly, reasonably, so it doesn't disrupt library service. And it's the same issue for parks. The people who are the users of these facilities, children, the elderly, these are the sensitive locations in each of your communities. And it waters down the entire safety and security of the employees as well, but of all the people using those facilities. And so I urge you to look at this aspect too. And we're not a business. We're the city. We provide services. And please remember how hard we all work to provide those services for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Bruce Francis, followed by David Bunjak.
Good afternoon. My name is Bruce Francis. I'm a supervisor with the Bureau of Street Services. And we, as a bureau, since the budget crisis, that seems to never go away, have been decimated. We have crews. We try to provide service. We work closely with council deputies, and we don't get to see you folks that often, but it's just, it gets harder and harder and harder to even make it to work. We have single pothole trucks that are covering entire areas. We have, we tried things like they contracted out the LA Marathon. You have a contractor that comes in and sweeps the parade route and or the marathon route, and then you have to call us to come and clean up the mess to get the streets open because they couldn't do it fast enough. We're good at what we do. We provide services because we live here, because we work here, because we want to be part of the city family. We want to protect our jobs. But every time all we hear is give 10% here, give 5% here. We did that. Our prices, like your prices, go up. But our salaries are either stagnant or going down. We're not asking for a handout. We're just asking to be fairly represented, fairly compensated for the work that we do for the citizens of Los Angeles. Contractors don't do what we do. When we have emergencies, we show up. We don't ask, how much are we going to get paid? When there's a water blowout, when there's a pothole, or, we go out, we try to fill, as many potholes as we can. We have 6,500 miles of streets to maintain, and, the Bureau of Street Services is down to 1,000 people, to cover 6,500 miles of streets for all of the services that we provide. And all we ask is for fair compensation for a fair day's work.
Thank you. Our next speaker is David Bunjak, followed by Michael Robertson.
How are you? I'm David Bunjak. I represent the members of 777, LIUNA, Local 777. I had written some few things down, but, something occurred to me. At the end of the month, this will be the 20th anniversary of the civil unrest. And for many of us that were here at that time, that was a very life-altering event. City employees rallied. We came. We provided service to the community. We put our lives in danger. Many of us coalition members put our lives in danger to help out the citizens. And one of the things that comes to mind is that if you talk about contracting out a lot of these services, contractors are not going to show up in these situations. City employees are dedicated to the city. We always have been. When I came to the city, I signed an oath saying that I would be here for the residents of the city, and I have been ever since then. And I'm proud of that service. I was proud of that service in the civil unrest. We think that the reduction in staff, CAO's budget proposals and reducing staff are going a little bit too far. We are competitive. I would also like to point out that, twice we renegotiated the coalition agreement to help save the city. As Cheryl pointed out, $850 million. The last time we came to the table, we were told by the mayor, we were told by the CAO that we had done our job and that they would take that and they would run with it, and they would not be coming and ask. They promised us they would not be coming to ask for more sacrifice. They would find it in other areas, and yet here we are at the table having to fight again. And I'm just, after all this service, after all this negotiating, I find it a little unbelievable that we have to be here again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Michael Robertson, followed by Donald Taylor.
Good afternoon, Budget Committee. Michael Robertson, President of the Los Angeles General Service Police Officers Association. Today I just wanted to bring attention to the fact about the consolidation. The officers that's been mentioned, I'm sure it's all over the city, of us becoming a part of LAPD. And basically, I just want to bring some attention to the fact that we're talking about career police officers in this consolidation, and I think a lot of that gets kind of lost in the rhetoric about having this consolidation done. And we're here representing them because I'm a general service police officer, and in the thought of doing this, I don't want to be lost in the fact that there's officers here that's given 15, 20, 25 years of their career to this city as police officers, not LAPD, general service police officers. And I don't think that should get lost in this consolidation. And the job that we've been asked to do, I think we've done it quite well. And I think those considerations should be truly considered. And you hear the rhetoric about the numbers and the 10,000 and the whole bit. We want to be more than the numbers. We really want to be this consolidation to come together as that would help the city as a whole and law enforcement and being out in the field doing what we do, the libraries, the parks, your offices, that's included in what we do every day. So basically just to bring the attention to the real nature of what really needs to be done if we're talking about a consolidation. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Next speaker is Donald Taylor, officer, followed by Daniel Weissman.
Donald Taylor, Vice President, Los Angeles General Services Police Officers Association. I'd like to speak to one of the core functions that we perform, and that is to protect you. We are sworn to jump in front of that bullet meant for you or a city employee. We are sworn to get that bomb before it gets into City Council or City Hall. This is what we do, and this is what we're best at. Our job is to protect you. All we ask is that you protect us now. Protect us from anything that may cause our services to go down. Protect us from anything that may cause police officers to get laid off or police officers to just fall by the wayside in a consolidation that, may or may not be, what the people of City of Los Angeles want. We are not for or against a consolidation because we haven't had a shred of evidence, a shred of paperwork to tell us anything about a consolidation. Supposedly there will be a document coming out tomorrow. We would like for you to study it, and we would like for you to ask us for input. There is no one that has asked a single General Services police officer for any input. We have LAPD coming into our office gathering information. We have people, staffers from different offices coming in to get information, but there's no information coming to us. We just ask for you guys to look out for us like we've always looked out for you, and we're quite sure that this will turn out for the best for all parties. Thank you.
Thank you very much, officers. Our next speaker is Dr. Weissman, followed by David Kissinger.
Gentlemen of the committee, ladies and gentlemen here, ladies and gentlemen in the audience who may hear this in various ways. I think many of us have heard Mr. Santana tell this same story several times over the last several weeks. As budget advocate, I've heard Mr. Villaraigosa, as the mayor, tell us that he's surprised that in his tenure of 6 years now, we seem to have the same $250 to $400 million deficit every year. The statistics show that that is exactly the case. We have the same income every year for the last 6 or 7 years. I would dispute Mr. Santana's statement that we can expect 2.5% or 3% rises in the city's national product or city's product comparable to the gross national product over the next several years, but hopefully it might occur. We certainly need more income from some source. We also need less expenses in some way. Mr. Santana's data very clearly show us that the budget deficit is going to be $222 million this year, but bounce up to well over $474 million because Mr. Villagrosa pushed $100 million worth of unpaid overtime for the police into the year after he leaves his office. The budget is a wish list, and nowhere have we seen as budget advocates, and I don't think you've seen as council members, and you're responsible for it, a budget that is truly balanced on July 1. It's your responsibility, ladies and gentlemen. It's our responsibility as responsible citizens to see that you do that. We'll be trying to help you as time goes on. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is David Kissinger, followed by Laura Olaso. The Honorable Laura Olaso.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, council members. David Kissinger with the South Bay Association of Realtors, and I wanted to express a concern about the proposal to double the documentary transfer tax. What we're basically talking about here is increasing the tax to essentially 1% of the property transacted, and what that means is that let's say a $500,000 home, which is not unheard of in the city, that transfer tax will be $5,000. Now, that is noticeable, and there is a lot of price sensitivity here, which is why our request would be to have this proposal held in committee for more research and more information before you go to the voters and ask them for a brand new tax hike next year should this go onto the ballot. Furthermore, the proposal with due respect to the CEO's report, the proposal that this would raise an additional $100 million on top of what I understand is nearly $100 million that was raised in the fiscal year 2010-11, that will not happen. It will not raise $100 million. It may come, well, I'm not sure it'll even come close either. Now, why is that? The markets respond to what the public jurisdiction is going to do. So if, for example, there is another $5,000 tax on a $5,000 tax on a $500,000 home, there will be fewer buyers and fewer sellers. For a number of sellers, it will be impossible to sell. It will be too expensive. A number of buyers will be disqualified from purchasing that home. In fact, we're aware of research that says that for in the statewide median home price, state of California, for every $1,000 increase on that price, approximately 20,000 families are no longer qualified to purchase that home. The CEO's report also calls for comparing it with cities like Oakland and Berkeley. It may be more appropriate to compare it with cities like Torrance, Culver City, Long Beach, Santa Monica, who have lower transfer taxes, and that is where the new families are going to go with the new jobs, new kids in school, new income. The city will lose and will be stuck with, again, a very volatile funding source, which will prevent the city from being the stable employer, from maintaining that level of service important that you've been hearing about today. And so, again, we would call on you to hold this for much more information before proceeding on it.
Mr. Englander has a brief question or
brief
comment.
question. You suggested and referred to a report indicated for every 1,000 there was 20,000 less eligible to purchase. Can you submit a copy of that to this committee?
I'd be glad to. That was prepared by the California Association of Realtors as part of their research and economic program. It is publicly available information. I'd be glad to make it available to this committee.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Laura Olaso.
Mr. Chair, I have a quick...
Mr. Kretz.
Do we have any truly quantifiable information that shows that members of the general public are even at all aware of what they pay on this tax? I would believe, and even was true for me when I've bought and sold a property, had no idea what the transfer tax rate was and really didn't focus on it much. I mean, it's a relatively modest portion of the total sale, and I would think you'd be in a pretty unusual circumstance to actually even know what the difference was between one city and another, much less actually take it into your decision making.
Well, I appreciate that, Councilmember, and I would answer the question this way. And when you're in a home transaction as a buyer or seller, anytime there is a dollar figure that goes on the table, whether it's a tax or some other function of the transaction, that becomes a negotiable component between the buyer and seller, which ultimately leads to whatever the sale price is that both buyer and seller agree to, as the market would dictate. So then if there's significantly more dollars going on the table, for example, $5,000 in the $500,000 home, that is a significant hit, and that may cause a buyer to say, I'm going to go to another city near my new place of work, where I don't have to pay that extra chunk of change.
Okay, thank you. And just as a reminder, public comment, we're not going to engage in dialogue here.
Understood, thank you.
So let's go to Ms. Olaso, followed by Ron Galperin.
Laura Lasso, representing the Glendale and the Pasadena Foothills Association of Realtors, whose names may belie the fact that parts of their association boundaries lie within the city of Los Angeles, and many of our members sell homes here in the city of Los Angeles. Just quickly, Councilman Corrett's comments. I remember when we bought our first house, and every penny counted, and we had not enough money to pay the escrow costs, and if all of a sudden those escrow costs were increased by double, we would have been in trouble when we were young marrieds. We think this 1% increase, or this increase, which adds 1% to the sale of a cost of home, is bad public policy. This is a very volatile stream of income, and David, if you could give me that figure. Yeah, okay. For example, in fiscal year 2005-06, the city received in revenue $217,000 million from the transfer tax. In fiscal year 08-09, it received $80,966, less than 50%. This is a very volatile and extremely fluctuating source of income. Bad policy to depend your city budget on that. In fact, the Price Waterhouse study showed that this was even more extreme fluctuations than sales tax and incomes. The other thing that you need to be thinking about is the continuing waves of foreclosures that are hitting our country, and particularly Southern California. As foreclosures become open, the government has put them on hold for a while, but they will be coming back again. Then all of a sudden you are increasing the cost of the sale of a home. The buyer isn't going to pay for it. Our members tell us the banks do not pay for these kinds of fees in a foreclosed property, which means that the seller will have to, which means the seller may back out, which means your neighborhood deterioration becomes even more pronounced than you want it to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Commissioner Ron Galperin, followed by Pat McOsker.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and council members. I'm Ron Galperin, served recently as chair of the just concluded Commission on Revenue Efficiency, and also as president of the Quality and Productivity Commission of the City of LA. I am here to urge all of you, and for the city as a whole, to really start paying attention to the Commission on Revenue Efficiency reports. First, our blueprint for reform of city collections, and also the 8 reports that we just recently came out with. A total of 115 recommendations that tremendously detail opportunities for hundreds of millions of dollars in revenues. And quite frankly, I do not see that reflected in the CAO's report. And notably, there's a mention of the Inspector General, but this was something that was approved by the council and funded by the council nearly 1 year ago, and we still do not have that in place. Now, what the report says is that the issue of collections are not going to solve all of our problems. And that may be true. But the reality is that there are hundreds of millions of dollars that are being left on the table. And I'm not talking about that which is that $500-600 million number that we've all been talking about that we know is not collectible for the most part. But there is also, for example, the parking occupancy tax, and we have a report on that from CORE that really identifies how we can relatively easily begin bringing in $25 to $35 more million per year by better enforcement of that, and a couple of other ideas as well. And intergovernmental revenue sources. 40% of our general fund money comes from intergovernmental sources, and we've done nothing to pay attention to how we collect those. There's incredible opportunity. We'd be happy to come and speak with you at length, me and my other commissioners, about all of the various core recommendations. We hope the city starts paying attention, because so far, quite frankly, I have my doubts. Thank you.
Thank you. Your next speaker. Oh, Mr. Rosendahl. Mr. Galperin.
Because you're a commissioner, I think it's important that we talk this through. Your recommendations for revenue generating added up to what kind of a figure?
Well, our first report, which was the blueprint for reform of city collections, had 65 recommendations that detailed up to $100 million a year in additional collections that we thought were achievable. What we said is in the short term that it would begin with somewhere around maybe $20 million a year and then build itself up over several years to $100 million a year. In our 8 final and follow-up reports, we identify First of all, one of them is a follow-up on that blueprint. The other 7 identify what we believe is $100 million now, within the next year or two, and up to $350 million.
Okay, saying that, was that officially transmitted to the
Absolutely.
city? And was the CAO responding to it in that period of time at all?
I have not seen any response from any of these city offices here to date. These reports went to a variety of different committees. Some question about which committees they did and didn't go to. There has not yet been a hearing on any one of these 8, although there's one scheduled for next week.
Okay, so thank you for that. I want to ask you that when you come back up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Pat McOsker, followed by Ron Miller.
Afternoon, council members. Pat McOsker, President, United Firefighters. Listen, I was skeptical of the CAO's report when I got here today, and then to hear him describe it, this plan to privatize, to roll back pay and benefits for workers as being somehow good for workers, really lost me. Let me tell you, I can't think of any worse ideas for the fire department than the 3 major things that are contained in this report. It talks about privatizing our ambulance service, taking firefighters out of ambulances and handing that business over to the corporations. That would be absolutely dangerous when it comes to public safety, and I won't even go into that right now, but it also not only wouldn't save a penny, it would cost you a fortune. We only have 950 firefighters on duty right now every day in Los Angeles, and we're so effective and efficient that we bring firefighters to fires who come on ambulances. We're dual function, we're cross-trained. And we bring firefighters to medical emergencies who come on fire trucks. That's why you see fire trucks on medical calls all over the city. You would not send any firefighters home. We could not operate with 700 firefighters protecting 460 square miles if you hand the tax dollars and this business over to private industry, like this privatization report calls for. This is a corporate grab. That's all this is. We just achieved legislation just a few months ago in California to more than quadruple the amount of money that we'll get back from the federal government for Medicare transports. That is why corporations right now all across the country, well, in California especially, but it's also occurring elsewhere, are trying to grab the business. They can finally make a profit. They can take those tax dollars for things that we all hold dear in the common and put them in their pocket and provide less service to the public. Also, the idea of hiring a consultant to tell us how to organize the fire department, how to be deployed, is a waste of money. We already have a standard for that. It's the NFPA 1710. And finally, this business about study and overtime is ridiculous. His predecessor reported to a committee just like yours back in 2007 that the cheapest way to staff the fire department is exactly the way we do it now, and I'll provide that report to you if he hasn't already. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Ron Miller, followed by Victor Gordo. Mr. Miller, welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm Ron Miller with the L.A. Orange County Building and Construction Trades Council. I'm speaking to this four-year budget outlook and update that was submitted on April 6th. That's not what was handed out there today, but there's talk of a new economic development model. If this is another name for a private partnership for the CRA, it'd be a bad road for the city to go down. We need a CRA group model after the old one, where there was oversight on the bidding processes, the payment of prevailing wage and benefits. The local hiring, which was done under the old one, was a success, putting many skilled craftsmen and women to work that lived in the city and bringing in new citizens to careers in the construction trades. A new model without proper oversight and a local hire agreement with the trades would turn the economic development into a slush fund for developers to cheat workers of wages and the city out of good quality developments. Model the new CRA after the old one and with a project labor agreement. Now let me speak to the work that the Coalition of City Unions has done. Year after year we grab this horse, we grab the reins of this horse and we try to lead it to the water. $850 million worth of water. But now that we look back, the reins of this horse, it's on a carousel. It's on a merry-go-round. We're just going around and around in circles. What has he done with the $850 million? Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Victor Gordo, followed by Bob Schoonover, and as of now, that's the last card that I have. Anyone else who would like to speak, please fill out a card and bring it forward. Mr. Gordo.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Victor Gordo, attorney with Laguna Local 777 and a coalition of LA City Unions. We are dismayed and disheartened with regard to some of the recommendations contained in this report for a number of reasons. First, the report seems to set the city on a course that will end in litigation. The recommendations, and I'm referring specifically to page 43 of the report, that essentially recommends that the elimination of pay increases that are contractual, that the city's contractually obligated to provide, the increasing of health care premiums, also a contractual issue, and then, of course, a new pension tier for civilian employees. These are all contractual obligations on the part of the city, contractual obligations that we together over the course of a few years have entered into, refined, and attempted to improve for the city's benefit. We're also dismayed because some of the recommendations provide absolutely no cost savings. A new pension tier, for example, may actually even cost the city money because it would trigger a new costing methodology over at Lacers. The OPS consolidation, again, you'll be receiving a lesser service at some of the most sensitive city facilities, libraries, parks, and you'll be watering down that service and paying more for it. Because these officers will cost more money at LAPD. We're asking you, again, to look at all of these issues individually and ensure that we aren't headed down the road to litigation. You have contractual obligations. We have contractual obligations. We're interested in better services, and we know you are as well.
Thank you. And again, after Mr. Schoonover, I have no more cards, so, okay, there's one coming. Mr. Schoonover, welcome.
Good afternoon. Bob Schoonover, President of SEIU Local 721. You know, unfortunately, it seems like we're back here every 12 months. You know, it started with the ERIP deal, the first one. We thought we had a TA. Miguel arrives, there's no TA. We redid it again. Came up with, I don't know, $59 million worth of additional cuts to make that a better deal. The ERIP deal became less generous, did that. Understood the economy. About, 6-8 months later, we're talking the same thing again, we did that. And we did it one other time after that. It sounds kind of monotonous, When you negotiate a contract, both sides are supposed to live up to it. And we have a very bad pattern going here, It doesn't really seem like, it was not even a year ago that Miguel Santana and Eric Garcetti actually came to our bargaining committee and said, thank you, you guys have done it, this is it. That's kind of what was said. That kind of sounds like a deal to me. To be back here with the same issues again, I'm not much of a believer in managed competition, glossing over contracting out. Especially when one of the entities, as you may remember, Fleet Services, just got an award. 9th best in the country. I thought we were all proud of that. Obviously not all of us. So, as I think about this managed competition thing, as I said, I'm pretty much not for that. What it really is contracting out. I think there may be one place in the city where we might be able to use that, though. Why don't we try that in the CAO's office and see if we get some better ideas, okay?
Thank you. Our next speaker is Carlos Rubio, and again, last card that I have, so anybody else want to speak, bring it forward. Mr. Rubio.
Hello, my name is Carlos Rubio. I am with the Teamsters Union, Local 911, representing over 400 crossing guards in the city, in all areas. And we've done that over 30 years now, I believe so. And the reason why I'm here is I just want to briefly speak to the exact same thing we've been hearing this whole afternoon, which is we believe in contracts, and we believe that, anytime that we sign a contract, we stick to our word. On another subject, 2 issues. One issue is this whole idea on parking occupancy tax. Our local Local 911 has represented the parking industry in Los Angeles since 1975, okay? And if there's one thing that we have learned about parking, okay, is that parking companies, like many other corporations, are in the business of making money, okay? And I would just suggest that if we're going to talk about increasing the parking occupancy tax, we should start by collecting the current tax. I'll give you an example. There's a company, one of the biggest city offenders, Prestige Parking, okay? They're one of the smallest parking companies in the area, yet they're the biggest offender. We've said this many times before. Talking about crossing guards, we represent 400 crossing guards, okay? I'll give you the Valley for an example. The Valley is one of the most dangerous areas to cross the street, yet we don't have enough crossing guards, but everybody wants a crossing guard on the corner. And, you know, in the past, we've even heard of the crossing guard program being eliminated. So we're here to tell the CAO, stick to your word. To the mayor, stick to your word. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if there's no other speakers, that'll close public comment on this issue. And I'd like to open it up for discussion with my colleagues. Mr. Rosendahl.
Yes, I'd like to talk about page 40, and I'm just going to focus on the fire department, item 4 and item 5. Item 4 is evaluate various options and best practices for provision of emergency medical transport services in the city. Let me make a statement first.
Let me be clear. I'm not recommending privatizing anything. It relates to the ambulance services. What I'm asking is that we take an opportunity to look at the existing structure that we currently have, look at it independently, and then come back with recommendations on how to improve it.
Okay, well,
85% of the calls that we receive are ambulance-related calls. And so that is a significant portion of the work that's done.
Yeah, and I appreciate your conclusion already, but I'm just going to make a statement on it anyhow. I believe turning over our emergency transport services to private companies in a city as large as Los Angeles would be a public health and public safety disaster. The Los Angeles Fire Department, serves as a de facto healthcare system in the city of Los Angeles. It is a seamless system when you dial with one entity from the moment you call 911 to the time a patient care is transferred to a nurse or physician at the hospital. Private ambulance companies are generally low-wage, high-turnover industries and often lack the professional level of service provided by a sworn member of the fire department. Moreover, their ultimate motivation is to make a profit, which is probably not in the best interest of providing an optimal level of quality of service. Personnel on LA Fire Department ambulance have a dual role, as you heard. Not only do they provide patient care and transportation to the hospital, but they're cross-trained as firefighters and augment the staffing of a structural fire and other non-medical related emergency instances. And the personnel in the fire ambulances pair up with engine and truck companies to put out fires, effect rescues, are certified to enter building burnings, and the personnel on private ambulance do not have such training. So just as a backdrop from a safety. And just a question or two on this. Is it true that the fire department is on target to collect approximately $67 million this fiscal year in ambulance billing revenue?
Yes.
Can we expect the fire department to collect even more revenue with the passage of AB 678, which enables the fire department to collect additional Medicare reimbursement revenue?
Yes.
Has this proposal been at all vetted with the fire department?
Which proposal?
This set of questions and comments before within the report. Were they brought into the loop at all on that discussion?
On the questions pertaining to the additional revenue? Yes.
Good, okay. Okay, I know that the LA Fire utilizes a different model. We're okay with our model, correct? Rather than looking at theirs, or what was your take about that? I could read the rest of it, but you came from the county. I know the LA County Fire utilizes the model of using private ambulances for transport, but I understand the county only collects revenue if their paramedics accompany the private ambulance to the hospital. So that kind of resolves that issue right up front. All right, and the fifth one was, real quick, conduct a third-party analysis of constant staffing deployment model currently utilized by the Los Angeles Fire Department to determine the most effective and efficient deployment of fire resource citywide. I understand the constant staffing model is a huge driver of overtime costs, but the only alternative to constant staffing is to shut down a fire company's medical resources or the entire fire facility. With the fire department, you can't predict what time of day someone is going to have a heart attack, a building is going to catch on fire, or when two incidents will occur simultaneously in the same response district. Fire departments' call stats don't paint a complete picture, as you may have already areas within lower call volumes, for instance, like I have in the Palisades, but that doesn't mean you're eliminating the risk of potential something happening at any time, day or night, when you need a full crew to respond. Question: what data would a third-party analysis rely on to make resource deployment determination?
It would look at everything. It would look at everything from how overtime is utilized, our current staffing capacity. They may recommend that we aggressively start hiring firefighters, or they may not. And so our recommendation is that because it's been an area of focus over the last several weeks, that we bring in an outside consultant to look at exactly the structure that currently exists and provide us recommendations, or to validate the current structure that we have.
And has the fire department had an opportunity to respond to this recommendation?
We've discussed the recommendation with the fire department, yes.
Okay, and the last thing is what you heard the commissioner get up and say of all of his reports and all of his suggestions. Tell us where we are with analyzing that, and how does that fit in with your revenue streams?
Well, the latest reports that were submitted have yet to be scheduled before the audit committee. So there's been no action by either the committee or the council on those recommendations. The recommendation to hire an inspector general of collections has been something that we've been working on for well over a year, as Mr. Galperin indicated. We spent several months trying to identify a way to actually hire Mr. Galperin at his request. The city attorney opined that that would not be appropriate to do, given that he chaired the committee that established the recommendation. And so we went out and did an outside search. First, an internal search to identify a candidate within the city family. Did not find a candidate. Brought together a panel that included both CD 13, the mayor's office, the chair of budget and finance at the time, and my office in the CLA to conduct a series of interviews. Then broadened it to identify external candidates. Came down to two. One of them ended up not working out for a variety of reasons. And we're now back to looking at an internal candidate within one of the proprietaries. The interviews will be this week. And hopefully that position will be filled within the next 10 days.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. And colleagues, just to kind of frame this a little bit, because I think the report that's before us is the beginning of a dialogue that we're all having, all of us with, all of the stakeholders in the city family and our union representatives, our constituents. This is the beginning of what's going to be a long and detailed and thorough discussion. And we can stay as late as need be to start that discussion tonight, but I do want to just give everyone the heads up that it's going to be my recommendation that what we do in terms of action today is, and I think I heard this sentiment widely reflected by all of the union leaders as well as the realtors and others, that there's significant and meaningful public policy recommendations in this report that really require significant policy discussion and a thorough vetting that we will engage in, I can assure you. It's not going to be today. And so it would be my recommendation not to advance forward to council today those policy recommendations, but that we should move forward with some of the fiscal fiscal policy recommendations. And I would suggest A1 and A2 in the section entitled Adhere to Responsible Management and Fiscal Properties. I'm sorry, let me go to the pages. So starting on,
Can I have it, before we start, unless you want to go
oh
through?
yeah, no, we're going to have a discussion.
Okay.
But I just want to put this
Yeah.
out. So, beginning on page 37, recommendations 1 and 2, A1 and 2, and B1 and 2. On page 39, recommendations A1 and 2, and then B3, which I think is numbered 3, it should be 1, but the 3 recommendations on page 39. And then, in addition to those, instructing the CAO, the CLA, and all other related departments to report back here on all remaining recommendations contained in the plan in the context of the mayor's budget during the budget hearings that will be upcoming, so that we can do all of this in the context of the actual budget and the thorough discussions we're going to have with each department when it comes to those matters. So that would be my recommendation, and as I say, we can have a discussion now. It's not going to foreclose further discussion as we move forward, but that's how I would like to proceed.
That recommendation.
Thank you. Sure. Mr. Kretz.
I'm not sure exactly where we go from here, because there's so many items and there's so many things that I might agree with and many that I disagree with. I would agree with Mr. Rosenthal's point on the fire department, which I suspect is a given, that we're not going to contract out ambulance services. On the other hand, looking at best practices, I don't think that's a bad idea to look. A lot of changes have taken place in the services that we provide, especially since such a high percent of our ambulance services. So there may be better, more effective ways to provide them, and I think we should look at best practices. As far as what we've just said we're looking to vote on today, I particularly have a large question about the reserve fund. I agree that it should be 5%, and in fact, at some point I think it should be higher. And I'd note that I used to serve on a city council with a city that at one point I think came pretty close to 100% reserve by setting aside money every year. But my question right now is, we're talking about doing this at the worst possible economic time. So targeting 5% and how quickly we get there are two very different questions. And my question is, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about trying to be at 5% by next year? Or are we talking about riding out this bad economy and then bumping it up to 5%? Are we talking about hitting that 5% and in good times trying to add a certain percentage every year so we actually get a higher reserve and we don't find ourselves in this situation next time there's a downturn? I mean, that recommendation isn't clear enough to me. So what are you thinking? What are you recommending?
So if you go to page 16 of the PowerPoint that we passed out, it shows that from page 16 shows the reserve fund since 1998. So we've been trying to reach the 5% for a couple decades, and we achieved it once, and in 2001-2, where we reached the 5.3%, and we haven't hit it since. And so we've been slowly building back the reserve fund during the period after we had to rely on it to end the year in the black 3 years ago. We're about $20 million short of hitting that 5% mark. And I would argue that, especially during times of economic uncertainty, you want to have a reserve fund that is solid, because we have so many other factors around us that are not. The economy is not within our control. It continues to recover in a slow pace. Our pension costs are somewhat in our control, but there's a big portion of it that it's not, because it's relying on the stock market. our overall costs as a whole have been growing, and so maintaining the 5% is critical more today than ever because of the uncertainty, because of the projected deficits that we see in the horizon. And so we're about $20 million short of hitting that mark, and it's an important part of our finances. And as I indicated, even LAUSD that is arguably in a worse financial shape than we are, maintains a minimum 5% reserve fund for exactly the same reason.
So what are you recommending then that we do?
That we try to reach the 5% reserve fund as part of the next budget. That $20 million that we put aside and be locked as part of the budget process for fiscal year 12-13.
Okay, and I personally would not agree on that being the time to do it. If that's what we're intending, I would definitely be a no vote. I think that this is a good time to maintain where we are. I think it's a reasonable amount in this period, but I think the time to achieve your reserve is when you actually have the money to contribute to the reserve, and not suddenly say, okay, now we're in a good economy, let's spend. I think that's the time that you want to set aside an extra 0.5% of your budget every year and try to bump it up to even higher than 5%. Right now, for this year, I think we're going to have a hell of a time balancing our budget, and by adding $20 million, I think we're just adding to our own difficulty and shooting ourselves in the foot. So I would disagree with that piece of it. I also wonder, again, I agree with the capital improvement program. I think we've deferred maintenance for many decades in the cases of many of our infrastructure areas. But if, again, what we mean is we suddenly start spending more on this right now in the worst economy in our lifetimes, I'm not sure I would do that. So again, I would ask you what we mean by prioritizing deferred maintenance. Are we talking about immediately spending to try to correct that, or are we talking about setting aside a certain percent every year once we're in better financial condition?
We already have a policy that's existed for almost 5 years that sets aside a percentage of the general fund for deferred maintenance, and that's about $30 to $40 million on an annual basis. Because it's part of what is assumed in the budget, then each year when we have a deficit, that percentage is included in that projection. And so one of the first things we do when we start working with the mayor and put the budget together, we say, for this fiscal year, we're going to defer that policy. And basically, instead of paying the 30 to 40 million, we only pay between 8 and 10 million. We've been doing that since the policy existed. We have yet once to actually meet that policy because of the fiscal situation that we've been in. And so what I'm recommending is that instead of pretending that we're going to make that investment, we just be honest that we're not in a position to do so, and that we come up with an alternative structure, first of all, that recognizes that the general fund isn't the only piece that pays for infrastructure. The city spends billions of dollars on infrastructure that are covered through the special funds, and that needs to be recognized as part of our investment to the future. But we should also recognize that the portion that we've established as a commitment hasn't been met, and so instead we need to come up with an alternative plan. And so essentially, by doing so, you're reducing the projected deficits in the future because you no longer have to account for putting that money aside only to take it out again. Okay, so that's what our recommendation is on that particular piece.
And that I would agree with, at least during these economic times. If we actually reach a point where we're starting the years at least at a break even, I would start to think about reinstating the policy.
And I would agree with you on that.
But for now, and in the foreseeable future, I don't think we're in a position to do that, so I would agree with that.
Thank you. Let me just clarify on the reserve. It's already the city's policy.
That is correct.
To budget a 5% reserve fund, correct?
Mm-hmm.
it's the mayor that's going to propose a budget on April 20th.
That is correct.
And it's the council's obligation then to vet that budget. So by advancing this recommendation to council, we aren't setting aside 5% of our budget right now for the reserve fund. We're reiterating the existing city policy that should be our financial goal. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So that will be vetted further once we get the mayor's draft budget. So what we're doing, Mr. Kretz, at this point is advancing that recommendation of our financial policy to council. What happens after we get the mayor's budget and it comes back to us, is fair game. So I'm certainly not saying, as we sit here today, that the council must commit to that 5% reserve fund, because I agree with you, it's going to be a challenge, to say the least, this year more than most. But I do want to ask you a comparative question on that, if you're prepared to answer, Mr. Santana, and if you're not, I'd like to know after you do the research. How does that level of reserve funding compare to, say, the 10 biggest cities in the United States, or to the 3 or 4 other big cities of California? Where are they at with their reserve fund in this greatest of fiscal crises that we've experienced internationally since any of us have been born?
5% is the floor.
Since most of us have been born.
That is the most basic reserve fund that most cities have. And it fluctuates between 5 and above 5. And that's why I pointed out that even the school district, which is, I
just want to stick with cities.
Right.
Because it's a different model, it's a different budgeting model. Counties and school districts are different. I mean, it's in terms of the biggest cities in America and the biggest cities in California. I would just, and again, if you don't have it now, it's fine, but I'd like to get the list. Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, Long Beach, San Jose,
We will put that together for you.
Yeah, we actually have their ratings, their credit worthiness, but I'd like to have the reserve fund level as well.
We'll be happy to provide you a breakdown of the same cities that are listed on the ratings.
That'd be great. Thank you. Mr. Englander.
Great. Actually, I was going to ask you for that as well, so thank you for asking for that. And then I was going to also ask on the reserve, according to the ratings, we're at AA minus by Fitch and AA by S&P and Moody's. AA3, we're 7th. Were we ever AAA? Have we been downgraded in the last few years?
We've been downgraded twice over the last 3 years. Ray, I rely on Ray since he was here.
I'd have to go back. I don't think, as far as I recall, I don't think we were ever AAA.
But we've been
I'll go back.
Downgraded twice in the last couple of years?
Yes, we have.
Is there a cost, once we're downgraded, of borrowing money, our annual TRAN and bonding and other elements that's based on our credit rating, just as a credit report for consumer?
Yes, I mean, we will always be able to borrow because of our size. Even the state of California, that's practically at junk bond status, is able to borrow.
They're able to borrow, but at what cost?
I mean, but the question is at what cost? And so it becomes more challenging when you get downgraded to be able to get the kind of competitive rates that we've been able to enjoy. And so another downgrade below the one we currently have, makes it harder for us to go after certain kind of funds because there are restrictions around certain investments being made within jurisdictions below a AA minus. And so mutual funds in particular would become almost impossible for us to access that market. And so it becomes obviously then more expensive as we go out to the market and we borrow, billions of dollars on an annual basis as part of the course of doing business.
In terms of looking at the annual cost, for one, the fact that we were already downgraded, I don't know if we have any idea of how much more money that's cost us since we've been downgraded twice, or how much more it would cost us if we were downgraded again. If you have any ballpark figure. But that number, is that a dollar amount that comes out of some reimbursed federal fund, state fund, or is it out of our general fund?
That comes straight out of your general fund. So instead of being able to keep those dollars here, we have to pay it to investors due to a higher interest rate.
Okay, so is one of the key elements that they look at, I know it's been, and from what I've seen, in the past, it's not all financial paper that they look at. It's also actions that the city council and the mayor take. There are votes, there are policy decisions that affect our ratings. Are they still looking at those kinds of things, such as voting just to support, again, the policy of having a 5%?
They specifically look at our policy. We spent time meeting with bond rating agencies recently on a discussion for some issuances, the refunding of our MICLA, and they specifically asked about our policy related to the reserve fund and when we're going to hit it. And so one of the things that we make the case about is that obviously we've been under a tremendous amount of fiscal strain, but even in that context, we've slowly been building it up. So if you look at that chart, since, we had to take from the reserve fund in a significant way, and 3 years ago, we slowly been building it up, and that has been a positive response, viewed positively by the rating agencies, and in part why our credit has stabilized.
Is there any way, and I don't know if it's possible or not, to come back with even some numbers to figure out if we held today where we're at a AA minus versus being downgraded once more, or versus being brought up in our credit rating to where we were since we dropped twice, how much money that would either cost us or save us annually. So you can make, this is a financial decision, and then looking at the fact that this is a 5% reserve, and there's some, and not just the members of this committee, quite frankly, there have been some other council members that have said, and even some of city family and other, and union reps and others that have said, maybe now this is not the year to do this. The question is, this is a financial decision that we're either going to give it to these investors or put it back into city investment and employees. It'd be nice to know, have an idea of how much money we could be talking about since on the rating. If there's a way to figure that out, I think it would be a much more informed decision.
We could certainly write a report on the cost of another downgrade, what that would mean in terms of our ability to access the markets. It's hard to quantify it because obviously a lot of it depends on when you go out to the market and
well, I think we have to assume worst case scenario.
Yeah, right. But I think we could certainly write a report on what the cost would be to the city should we face another downgrade.
Okay, and then the other questions.
Mr. Engler, before you go to your next question, just to follow up on that point, because I think it should be part of the same report. I think that's very instructive to have that information, but I think it should also, again, be put in the context of what's happening in other cities as well. Right. So we've had this comparison here of the current ratings, but if these other cities have incurred downgrades recently as well, if the rest of the country is experiencing downgrades because we've had this great international collapse of our economy, that's a relevant piece of information too, because it's a competitive marketplace. And if other cities are being downgraded, that it may in fact not be due to our policy choices. It may be a factor that mitigates our ability to influence that, I guess is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to have that information contained in that report as well.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, can I add something on that point?
Sure.
I don't know if there's a way to, I know we've done this before, having conversations with some of these rating agencies, but to get a sense from them of what they're looking for, and also how much they're crediting us for a lot of the things that we've done in a relatively short period of time. We've cut thousands of employees off of our rolls. We've done things with pensions. We've done things with benefits. We've done things with retiree health. We've done things with efficiencies. There's a lot of positives here. So I'd be somewhat stunned, not that it couldn't happen if we got a downgrade after doing so many of the right things. And again, to show some progress, I might see us contributing something towards the 5%, but not necessarily feeling compelled to do the whole thing at once unless we were told, hey, you do it, you get a sure upgrade. If you get that kind of feedback, that's one thing. But I'd be curious if we can get a sense of all the moving parts of that, rather than just that 1.5%.
If you read their reports and they issue a 2-3 page report every time we get a rating, they discuss sort of our strengths and our weaknesses. And consistently in our strengths, and as part of the reason why we stay in close communication with them and talk to them on a regular basis, is that they have discussed the fact that the city has been able to reduce the structural deficit nearly in half in 3 years, that there's been progress made in a number of different fronts. And so they recognize that as part of a sign that we're headed in the right direction, and I would obviously concur with that, because I'm the one who has to make that pitch and tell that story. Which is an accurate story. At the same time, they also recognize one of our weaknesses, and the biggest challenges they raise are things that are not within our control. The fact that we are in California and can't raise our own revenue by ourselves, okay? Even though it's not our fault that that's the case, they have to cite it as an issue because they compare us to other cities throughout the country, and they can. Chicago did that. The fact that we play a role in the economic recovery, but we are part of a larger recession. And in Los Angeles, unfortunately, the recovery has been slower than other parts of the country. And so they recognize that. I'm
sorry, I shouldn't have taken the floor away from Mr. Englander. I apologize, Mr. Englander. Please go ahead with your question.
A couple other things. Now, it keeps coming up on the IG for revenue. There's a lot of debt that everybody keeps talking about, and the majority of which has not been yet written off. So it keeps coming up that there's this $100 million out there. I don't want to ask you here and now to go through it all, because we know full well, and we've done that the majority of that is old paper, and it's just sitting on the books and it hasn't been written off. Do you have any idea when that's going to happen, particularly on the old ambulance billings that we know with certainty and surety that we're not going to see when we're going to get it off the books?
Well, I think that's really the number one task that we have for our Inspector General, is to look at the debt as a whole and provide a recommendation as to what to write off. So we're establishing a more realistic goal, and we're not working on a number that's so unattainable and so unreal that we're not doing anything. And so hopefully within the next 10 days we'll have somebody in place, and that will be their number one task, is to look at the debt and the major pieces and make recommendations on what should get written off the top, so that we could focus on what can be achieved.
And we're hoping to have that person in the next couple of weeks?
Yes.
Okay. One comment before I get into a couple other things is on the OPS consolidation. It was mentioned, and I don't remember who mentioned it, but it was one of the public speakers that said that the OPS officers are sort of at the bottom of the pool of law enforcement in the city, and I couldn't disagree more. I think, in fact, I just wanted to say on the record that these are the folks who are out there not securing libraries and parks. They're securing people inside libraries and parks, seniors, youth, the most sensitive in the community. If there is a way to consolidate them for efficiencies, they go through a lot of the same training, quite frankly, as LAPD, in the LAPD Academy as well. And these are great men and women of the city that if there's a way to recognize them in the consolidation, I absolutely support that. Be proud to have them wearing either badge. But the issue is saving dollars and keeping them on the job, whatever uniform that might be. And so I just wanted to state that for the record, because I know there was a speaker on that earlier, so I made a note of it. On the 218 issue, Mr. Santana, on the parking tax, the document transfer tax, are those both 218 issues?
Yes, they require a vote.
And this couldn't go on a county ballot? It has to go on a city ballot?
It could go on a different ballot, but the threshold would be higher, require 2/3.
On a county?
So what allows it to be a 50% plus one is to put it on the same ballot that the mayor and some of the council members would be on. That's part of what the initiative required.
And we'd have to pay more for it.
That's correct.
For the county one, correct.
Yeah,
but it would be done sooner.
If it wasn't in our cycle.
Right, but higher threshold.
And the truth is that even if those two initiatives were passed, they will have really little impact on the fiscal year 12-13 budget. It would really be about the 13-14 budget.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure about that. Under your expenditure challenges and opportunities, one of your suggested elements, that I know it's all going to come back in here as well, but is to sever the employment relationship with DWP, and it mentions that. How would we go about doing that? How could something like that be done?
I think that's one of the things that, we have to look at, and part of the challenge that we have is that we're part of the same family, but we really have very distinctive missions and funding sources, and there's two challenges that the way the current status quo works. Number one is that some of our finest talent on the city get absorbed or transferred to DWP because they simply pay more. And part of the reason they pay more is because they're an enterprise and they compete against other enterprises.
No, I understand all of that and the historic reasons, and I do appreciate the explanation. I know there's some folks that have been sitting here a long time, too. I just was wondering
what the process would be.
Is there actually a process? I've never heard of that being done.
It would ultimately take a charter amendment to make
a charter amendment. Yes. And that would be a charter amendment administratively voted on by the council or put before the voters?
It would have to require to go before the voters.
Okay. And then on the asset management, it says that the CAO will begin solicitation process to hire consultants to study the city's asset management functions. Who does asset management now?
That's done within GSD.
So why aren't they doing it? Why do we have to hire a consultant? Why can't we instruct the general manager? Or shouldn't this be a function of the general manager in GSD to know where the city's assets are?
I think it's not just about identifying where the assets are, it's really putting together a strategic plan around how to manage our assets. And, over the last few years, as has been talked about, we obviously have significantly reduced the size of the workforce. Part of what we need to do in that process is identify where we have our leasing space throughout the city.
Have we asked them yet to bring forward a report?
Working with the department through the Municipal Facilities Committee to try to do that. Their department has been severely cut due to, obviously, the fiscal crisis. And so what we're working with them is to identify consultants who help us develop sort of a larger strategy around not just our assets, but also figuring out how some of these assets could actually be used as vehicles for economic development.
It's my understanding, and over the years that I've heard, is that GSD doesn't even really truly realize where all of our real estate is, that they haven't kept great track of what we have and what we don't have. And so I'd like to separate report back on that item in the budget as well. And the more I hear that these issues with GSD, the more I'm going to tune in on them. But if they don't know where our real estate is, I don't think our real estate's got up and moved in terms of real property. And I'm just talking about real property, and not real estate being equipment, but real property. So I'd like to see where we're at on that. On the last thing that I had is if we could add to Mr. Krikorian's list of recommendations was on page 37. He had 1 and 2. I'd ask that we add 3 and 4 as well. And then that concludes my questions and time on the floor. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Englander. I think, the risk management accountability issue is one that has bugged me for a long time. And this is the idea that, sometimes we incur significant liabilities because of long-lasting failures to act on behalf of some departments. My feeling is that there are very different issues that arise from department to department in that, where they are with their base level of funding right now and their ability to do the preventive things that we need to successfully manage risk, very different. So the reason that I didn't include that among my recommendations is I think that there are substantive policy decisions that we have to make around that issue that are actually going to require significantly more discussion than I think we can have today. That's not just a no-brainer to say that all departments should be required to absorb liabilities there.
If I could make, and maybe not the time, but I believe that this is exactly where committees the rubber hits the road, to work out some language details, to move on policy, to get things moving. I would suggest we do come back and look at the absorption of liabilities, but I'd like to move forward on and changing the text then, if we could, to say that we hold general managers accountable from failed management decisions and repeated mistakes, and move that as a policy item, because I think the city has failed to do that for far too long, quite frankly. And then the absorb the liabilities part, we can report back on that in terms of how we would treat it differently.
So just to make it a general statement.
A general
holding
statement of policy that we're requiring
I'm fine with that.
general managers be held responsible from failed management decisions and repeated mistakes.
I'd be fine
I could
with that.
support that, too.
Right.
Sure.
So, Mr. Kretz, any objection to that? Okay, well then, that will be part of the recommendation. I'll take that as a friendly amendment, I guess,
Yes.
because it has no
Thank you.
opposition.
And on the funding and implementing the citywide system upgrades, that's moving forward as a policy, not an actual implementation of costs. Is that correct? Just a policy stating those are the things we should be looking at. And so from a policy perspective, that's why I asked that number 4 be brought forward as well. Ultimately, if we have better technology and infrastructure, and those are priorities, essentially it should save us money, not cost us money in repair and maintenance.
What we're trying to say there is that, you know, like a lot of things that we've been confronting over the last few years, is that we approach technology on a ad hoc basis. And so we really think we need a strategic plan about what kind of systems do we want to have in place over the next 5 and 10 years. And then whatever we end up purchasing for those systems be based on that plan. And so it's really the discussion of the plan that's the most important thing. Okay. So that we're not just reacting to whatever need we have at the time without looking at the bigger picture.
And again, as long as that's not seen as something that prioritizes these budget priorities over all else, because we don't have the budget yet. But it's, as a general statement, that we need to be funding and supporting our technology infrastructure in order to support all of our departments. I think that makes good sense as well. All right, anything else?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Great.
Mr. Kretz, and then we're going to go to item 9 because Mr. Rosendahl wants to be heard on that before.
On the things
we wrap.
that apparently we're ready to vote on, the one that still leaves me uncomfortable is the one about budgeting the reserve fund. I wonder if we could change the wording to something a little bit more broad, like determining how much to budget towards achieving a reserve fund, so that we recognize we want to move in that direction, but whether it's $5 million or $20 million.
How about we do this? Instead of budget, why don't we change that language to reaffirm the city's commitment to a reserve fund that is at least 5%? That probably doesn't go as far, Miguel, as you want to say right now, but I think that is the sentiment that we're talking about.
That's fine. I agree. I think we should have that commitment, but whether we get there this year is a different question.
Right. Okay. Without objection, then, all of those recommendations will be the action of this committee. Thank you very much, and thank you all for participating in a very good discussion. I would like now to move on to item 9 out of order, if we can.
Sure. Item 9 is a motion to Rosendahl Krikorian relative to requesting the Los Angeles Fire Department to report on current apparatus repair backlogs, critical staffing vacancies in the supply and maintenance division, and related matters.
You're going to turn it over to him.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I'd like to toss it to Mr. Rosendahl, because I know you're tight on time. So if you'd like to be heard on this, and then we can hear from the department.
First of all, I want to thank everybody for being here who are leaving now, and also those that are here, and the fire department personnel for being here, and I wanted to move as quickly as I can. I'm going to make a statement or two, ask some questions, and please respond to all of this. Last week, I had an opportunity to tour the LAFD Supply and Maintenance Division facility, known as the shops. I was thoroughly impressed by the professionalism and dedication of all the personnel assigned there. I'm fully aware that we're in a budget crisis, but what was very evident is that the work being done here is absolutely mission critical to the functioning of the fire department. I'd argue that we need to look at the staffing needs for this facility just as importantly as we do for our fire stations. There's a tremendous backlog of repair and continues to grow. It is very clear they need to be able to fill critical vacancies to prevent the entire operation from falling over the cliff by reaching zero apparatus availability, hopefully never. Simply put, the fire department's fleet staff is woefully undersized in relation to the size of the current fleet. As the size of the fleet has grown over the year, a number of authorized positions have not, and the number of filled positions continue to decline. I'm told there are currently 84 authorized positions in the maintenance section of the shops, but only 71 of them are filled. Overtime is not closing the gap, and a couple of these vacant positions are unique and highly specialized, like the welder and the machinist. In fact, 2 mission-critical positions that became vacant less than 2 weeks ago, and I looked at those spots and and what they do. Right now, for the apparatus that comes in to be repaired, only the most critical and safety-related repairs are being completed. The less important and maintenance issues are being deferred due to staffing shortage. As you know, with our personal vehicles, deferring maintenance only creates a bigger and costlier problem down the line. It also reduces the useful lifespan of the vehicle, and the fire department's apparatus are quite expensive. To underscore this, I've been provided statistics from the last 12 months that indicate approximately 3,869 individual repair defects were reported and corrected by the fleet staff, while 2,011 repair defects have been deferred. There's always been several instances in my office have been made aware of where there were not enough aerial ladder trucks in working order to provide service to all of the fire stations they are assigned to. This is very concerning, obviously, to all of us. There are also frontline apparatus driving around with unsightly body damage, but given the lack of available reserve apparatus and the limited staffing at the shops, these vehicles are not being taken out of service to be repaired. I'm aware that several essential supervisor positions are vacant and are currently being filled by personnel who are working out of rank, which reduces the labor hours they would normally apply directly to working on vehicles. For example, an auto electrician is currently serving as an acting automotive supervisor. 2 heavy-duty equipment mechanics are providing frontline supervision to the aerial and triple shops, which would normally be the duty of an equipment repair supervisor. But one of these positions is vacant. My goal is to bring long-term stability to the operation of the shops with some of the following ideas, and I would like to hear the fire department and the CLA response to each. Provide immediate backfill authority for any of the current 84 authorized positions when a vacancy is created, and not allow any of these positions to be frozen. Exempt certain shop staff positions from the managed hiring process that are absolutely critical. The fire department is a 24/7 operation, but this division that is critical to its mission is not. Has any consideration been given to allowing the shops to implement a swing shift? This, of course, would be subject to the meet and confer process. Here are the questions, and then I just say a recommended back. Questions. I'm aware that the fleet is aging. I know we have been continuing to use MICLA funds to replenish the ambulance fleet, but they have been frozen for the last 3 years on purchasing heavy apparatus. What are the greatest needs right now? The heavy fire apparatus is as far as replacement. What are the greatest needs right now? The heavy fire apparatus as far as replacements. Have you been in contact with the shops regarding these prioritization lists of vacant positions that have been requested to be filled? And what do we currently stand on filling the vacant welder and machinist positions? Has the fire department proposed filling any vacant positions at the shops in their budget requests to the mayor. And then the request, I'm asking for callbacks. I'd like to request that the fire department report back to the council in this committee on a quarterly basis to keep us appraised of progress. I'd also like to request the fire department to report back quarterly on the performance of metrics that are directly related to staffing to ensure that additional positions are filled. And finally, I'd like to ask the fire department to provide quarterly report backs on vehicles out of service rate and repair log. I know I talked a lot. I'd like to go back to the questions and comment on everything I've said, but the first question, just saw them, but just react to everything I've said for the record.
Okay. My name's Tony Varela. I'm the Assistant Chief in charge of the shops, supply and maintenance. And with me on my left, go ahead, Rick.
I'm Richard Kaplan. I'm the Equipment Superintendent, Supply and Maintenance Shops.
So, let's see, your first question had to do with our greatest need when it comes to heavy apparatus.
Right.
And I had submitted a budget proposal for the use of MICA fund, but just getting specifically to the heavy apparatus, we haven't purchased aerial ladder trucks for the last 3 years. And if we were to follow the domino, and I know, Councilman, you probably heard some of these numbers, but if you were to follow the domino and what we would like to see done, that would be 15 trucks, aerial ladder trucks, at close to $900,000 apiece. And as far as the triples, we're behind 30 triples on the domino. So what that has in the net effect is that just what you said and have in your comments is that it's like a personal car. Where we would normally start replacing pumps or transmissions till a certain age, now we're finding that we're replacing them a number of times in an aging fleet. So it just, with an aging fleet, just comes more repairs. You also asked a question about...
You've been in contact with the shops regarding their prioritized list of vacant positions that they're requested to fill.
Yes, well, because we put that together.
Right.
Okay. Because we put that together. Our prioritized list, I can read that off to you if you'd like. I'm not quite sure what Sal has to say on this issue, but we put our list forward. A lot of it has to do with filling the supervisor positions, which would also allow us to get those mechanics that are acting right now and put them back on the line. In our request, we'd also identified a number of ERIP positions because, quite honestly, you asked us straightforward, tell us what you need and don't mix words. So we pretty much gave you what we would like to have, and we did establish a priority list.
Good.
Yes, Salvador Martinez Fire Department, just to elaborate a little more, Councilmember. We are currently working with the CAO to move forward on getting that welder and machinist position filled.
Oh, great.
Those are, the welder was the only one we have, so it's critical that we get that filled. So we're working with them. We've also submitted a packet of other positions from the shop to manage hiring for consideration and filling those positions. And we'll continue to monitor and work with the sales office to try to make progress on filling those key positions.
Including that machinist that we were talking about?
That took a higher priority since they were, the welder and the machinist went a little forward.
Rick has some information on
The machinist, I just received notification today that both the machinist as well as the welder moved through the managed hiring, and we have approval to hire those positions.
Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that. I mean, we made some calls. We talked around the edges of
That was a
power
big
there.
deal.
Oh, well, bless you.
This is a huge impact. What most people don't understand, you think, okay, a welder, the impact on a huge fire department. The fact of the matter is, we have a lot of custom-made parts that are put on the fire trucks and the boats, and every now and then we have to do some adjustments to the helicopters utilizing, the machinists, and quite honestly, we don't use a welder on the helicopters. But nevertheless, those two positions right there are very critical. They might not seem important to many, but they will stop a repair job cold. And when we send that out to the private sector, we have to get in line, because they have other customers that they see on a daily basis that appear to be more important to them. So it's a challenge when we go to the outside.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm very happy to hear that, because when I went over in the rain and all that Friday and saw everybody there, I felt like I was stepping into a situation where they were really, really saying, like, you hear Pat all the time talk about sworn. These are important as sworn, because if you don't have those vehicles in tip-top shape, you're gonna have a disaster to deal with. But the overall issue of 84 positions authorized and only 71 filled, how can we go forward with filling more of those authorized positions?
Well, we make the requests. I will tell you, we need to create value there, and the value that we present to you, so you go forward and fight for us, is the fact that we are getting a backlog in our repair staff. You saw that. As a matter of fact, you probably were very cautious as you walked around the facility, because have now asked that the overflow, the damaged vehicles be put up at Frank Hoskins for storage, because quite frankly, we don't have any room at the shops for all the apparatus that are down. We're to a point right now where when we reduce the size of the department and close the 7 trucks and the 11 triples, that we're utilizing that fleet that's supposed to be salvaged out to keep us afloat. So although we've salvaged out 4 trucks, we still have 3 that we're utilizing right now that keep us in operation, so that when the repair or backlog on the aerial ladder trucks happen, which they happen every day and it fluctuates, those 3 have been keeping us afloat. So we haven't had to close down any trucks. Now, that's right now. We have numbers that show the times we've closed down trucks and had to reorganize our delivery model out in the field. And quite honestly, we've been very fortunate. It hadn't bid us, but we'd have a hard time justifying that if, in fact, somebody knew we were supposed to have something else out in the field.
I just want to thank you for your straightforwardness as well. I want to thank the people I met there Friday. They were awesome. They were really committed to getting the job done, and everybody was a little worried because the councilman himself is here, kind of thing. But we're all part of the same family, and that's the family I care
We really appreciate your support, and your staff member, John, has been
Gregory.
outstanding. He's worked very hard. But I also have to bring up something else that you need to know about. You're right, it is a family. General Services has now put a supervisor at supply and maintenance to assist us in acquiring auto parts because we've had such an issue. They've gone so far as to adjust their staffing in their warehouse and put more people dealing with the auto parts issue, because quite honestly, they attend every staff meeting every Tuesday, listen to the issues, and can't believe why we're having so many problems securing auto parts. And I just need you to recognize General Services for assisting the fire department in getting those emergency apparatus on the road. They've done a stellar job, and I told Ken Desowitz I would say something today because they've been over backwards.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. This is a motion for a report back, and you made reference to this report in which you indicated your apparatus priorities. I haven't seen that yet. I don't know, Mr. England, or if you've seen...
What I was going to ask is if we can just go ahead and move it out of this committee.
We
and it goes to
should.
Public safety. It's duly referred to another committee as well, so we can continue the dialogue. But if you can, if the chair so wishes, to move this out of committee, move to public safety, but actually let me know when you're ready with the written report so we can go ahead and get it scheduled and we have written documentation.
I would like to do that. I would second that, but I would also like the other reports that you've mentioned today that have already been prepared. I'd like to get that because I haven't seen that yet.
And basically, those are the MICLA reports, which I prioritize in different funding packages that went forward, and we've been working with Mark Davis and to push it forward. So.
Great. So if you could just follow up with my staff on that, I'd like to be able to see that. Yes.
One other thing I wanted to mention, as we talk about the funding for the heavy apparatus, as the equipment moves through our fleet, when we do not receive heavy apparatus and we continue to keep the current apparatus in service, what we observe is that we have more and more apparatus that fall out of warranty. That increases the workload on the shop when we don't see an influx of new apparatus that would be covered under warranty for its life cycle of that warranty period of 5 years.
Okay. Thank you. I do have a card on this. Mr. McCosker?
Councilmember, I wanted to comment, first of all, thank you for this motion and say that I agree with everything that you've said and really they've said. I mean, you're right. The mechanics, the work that they do, the people at our shops are every bit as important to public safety as rank and file firefighters are. It's very much like our dispatch center, very much like our fire prevention bureau. Those are public safety functions, and if they don't get done, if they don't have staffing to do the work there, we're in danger. And without mechanics, we can't roll. I drive a fire truck down in San Pedro, and I know what the challenge is with the loss of staff that they've suffered. They're working so hard. First of all, you see that every single day. We cherish those mechanics. They're really, really good and really hard working, and they can't keep up. They're actually triaging like we do at the scene of a big medical emergency. They're figuring out which gaping wound needs to be fixed first and leaving the rest. And those other things then fester and become problems. It's penny wise and pound foolish to not staff up there. And we support it, wholeheartedly. That's not probably what you expect to hear from a guy who's fighting for a shrinking slice of the pie here. But, we get it. It's public safety. They're partners. And we hope that you'll fully fund that, just like we hope we get back to a fully funded fire department in general.
Thank you very much. That was very good news about the unfreezing of the positions for the machinist and the welder by the Managed Hiring Committee. I very much appreciate that. And Dr. Weissman wants to speak on this matter as well. Dr. Weissman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This time I'm definitely speaking as a doctor. As a pediatrician, as someone who has had substantial experience with burns care, with hyperbaric oxygen, with emergency care, and with the development of the paramed program. I've flown in the ambulance helicopters, well, when I was a younger man, quite a bit. At any rate, there's no group of people in our city that I have more respect for than our parameds. They are the model of emergency medicine for the entire country. They are a resource that we, I think, owe a debt of gratitude to, and that we have a responsibility to continue to show the country how a good emergency medical service should be done. Everything that we can do to support these people, I think, is worth it. There is no injury more difficult and more painful than a burn. There is no time that is more precious than those few seconds that it takes for a fire, paramed, or EMS, AMT supported ambulance to get to the bedside or to the site of somebody who is down, child or adult. We have, I think, every bit as much obligation to maintain our fire department and our emergency medical services as we do our police department, with all respect to our police. These people who are in this room are tops. I certainly ask your full and complete support for their work. I know how difficult it is to find the money, but we've got to find it somewhere.
Thank you very much. So it's the recommendation to approve this matter and to advance it to council. It's also double referred to public safety, so it will be heard in public safety as well before it gets to council.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I move the item.
Okay, thank you.
And he'll read into the record again what the report backs will be on it.
Well,
okay, you already did. I did.
Yeah, you did. I have them here, and we'll make sure the clerk has them as well. Yes.
Okay. All right. So that, without objection, that'll be the action of the committee. And now, it's 10 after 5. We have two more items, 7 and 8, which we can hear briefly, but I think it was my understanding that we were going to continue number 7 for further discussion in this committee in the context of the budget. And we were going to note file 8. Okay.
If that's the case, I'm not aware of it.
Okay. Well, then
if you like, we can take 7 and 8 together. 7 was the motion corrects the bonds relative to restoring Los Angeles Fire Department service levels for the remainder of 11-12 fiscal year. 8 is a motion corrects Weezer relative to returning savings from labor negotiations with the United Firefighters of Los Angeles to the Los Angeles Fire Department and related matters.
Okay. Let's go ahead and take those two matters together then. And Mr. hear first from the department, and then we will hear our public comment on these matters. Right now, the cards that I have are from Mr. McOsker and Dr. Weissman. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much,
Mr. Chair?
President. Yes.
I would note that although they seem to be related, I think item 8 is probably moot because I think we did expend those monies in the general fund, although the amounts are probably similar and for the same purpose. So I would just move that we receive and file number 8 and just focus the discussion.
And that would be fair. Essentially, that money will be going back to the department. They have a shortfall of roughly about 16 million or so. So those monies will come back just to sustain existing service.
That makes sense. So do we note and file, or do we receive and file?
I think we can receive and file the motion, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Kretz, very much. So that results number 8, and that brings us to number 7. Gentlemen, welcome.
Good afternoon. David Yamahata, Chief Deputy Emergency Operations Fire Department. In reference to number 7 regarding restoring the staffing level back to the fire department for the remaining 2 months. As you're well aware of, in our current deployment plan, the department reduced our overall staffing by 318 positions. To restore those 318 positions back would, from a salary perspective, you're looking at approximately $2.4 million for the remaining 2 months of this current fiscal year. In conjunction with that, what you also need to understand is that when we implemented our deployment plan, we reduced our overall staffing by 318 positions. The fire department was benefited in the sense that we did not have to lay off any firefighters, so those positions were utilized as extra staffing on a daily basis. Those individuals that were extra staffing were utilized to fill positions normally vacant by individuals taking time off, injured, sick, or anything else. So from a fire department budgetary perspective, we were able to save funding. By bringing those 318 positions back over the course of time, we've had a number of individuals that have retired through attrition. Of those 318 positions, about half of those have retired. So currently, out of the 318, we have about 160 that are remaining. To bring back the 318 would impact our overtime account, approximately about an additional $4 million over the course of the next 2 months for the remaining of the fiscal balance. So what you're looking at is approximately $6.4 million to bring the positions, the 318 authorities back with that. In conjunction with that, there are some ancillary impacts. As you heard previously from Assistant Chief Tony Varela, from our SHOPS perspective, bringing back those 18 fire resources, the additional rescue ambulances, it's going to be in conjunction with that. You're going to have additional repairs, which are going to require additional mechanics to continue to work on those apparatus. In addition to that, you bring back 318 sworn positions. There are some critical civilian staff that are going to be necessary to support those additional resources that we bring back.
Actually, let's go ahead and hear from Mr. McOsker, and Dr. Weissman, you can defer on this one. All right, Mr. McOsker.
Members, I think there's no misunderstanding on number 8. Is there any chance I can speak to number 8? I put a card in for it. It's something that is misunderstood, and it's very, very frustrating to me.
Well, why don't you go ahead and speak to that? I'll give you a bit of extra time.
I appreciate that. Listen, the $7 million that we're talking about here was taken from the fire department budget. I don't know if you remember last year when the budget was being developed, police officers reached a contract before we did. That's the way it works around here. They get to go first. They saved the city $20 million on the 2% payment toward retiree health care. At $20 million, though, their budget cut, you know, the nut they had to crack, they were given back that $20 million for more service, more cops on the street, which is great. They saved money and it paid for service. as our budget was being debated, I said to you all, and an amendment was made, a motion was made by Councilmember Garcetti, hey, we're going to save the same amount. We'll take that contract right now. You know darn well we'll agree to the same contract, or you'll impose that, or more if we didn't. And our savings for that is $7 million. There's the first piece of your neighborhood fire service restoration account. Put that savings, like you did for the police department, back into the budget. Instead, when the dust settled, and by the way, that motion passed, and that was the intention of you all. But when the dust settled, and I think probably the CAO and perhaps the chair of the budget committee was done with our budget, $7 million was taken out. In other words, going in, we had a $477 million budget, took $7 million out and put it over in the UB account for our savings that we did provide, leaving us $470 million, or underfunded for the amount of staffing that we had. Now that we have this deficit, remember, $16 million deficit, $7 million was created that way, and we can talk about the creation of the rest of the deficit. Now we're getting it moved back in. So we didn't buy back with our sacrifice, with firefighter sacrifice on retiree health care, we didn't buy back any service. We didn't get what the cops got. We didn't get the same respect, and we just got it taken away. So that really, if you're trying to restore some services right now, if you're trying to put ambulances back now and figure the rest of it out later, that $7 million really should be put back into the fire department properly. Thank you for the additional time on motion, or on item 7, whichever it is. Listen, thank you. I really appreciate, that motion and the desire, the sentiment to restore everything, because that's what we need to do as quickly and sort of as permanently and effectively as we possibly can. But I understand we're responsible. We don't want to bankrupt the city. We don't want other workers to be furloughed or laid off. We don't want to do it in a way that's irresponsible and can't be done and maybe won't stick. We're okay with incremental, restoration. I understand that tomorrow in council you'll debate a recommendation for 6 ambulances. I also understand they're only part-time ambulances. I hope the first step that you take is restoring all ambulances and making them permanent or full-time ambulances, not some Band-Aid restoration with your ambulances, but you ought to amend that and have all 6 of those ambulances come back the way that they left, and that is full-time, there 24 hours a day for those neighborhoods. And then what I hope you'll do, and we can do together, is come up with an incremental plan to restore all of our resources. And it's going to take probably a few years. And that's really the nature of Councilmember Garcetti's motion, which is another good one and goes beyond the end of this fiscal year. We want to work. We want to partner with these guys, believe it or not, on this. And that is with fire department management and with the CLA and the CAO. I hope maybe you'll amend it that way too and bring us in to figuring out what that multi-year affordable plan is to restore every lost resource on the fire department. But that's what needs to be done. I mean, this is great that you want to restore it all, but we need them, past just the end of the fiscal year, and I hope that we'll do it that way responsibly. We're with you on that.
Thank you very much. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. This matter is going to be referred as well to the Public Safety Committee, as I understand it. And
Mr. Chair, is it being referred with any kind of recommendation? Is there a vote?
I'm sorry?
Is there a vote being taken on this?
Well, I was opening it up for discussion. So, but I just wanted to note that it is going to be sent to Public Safety as well. So I was going to give everyone the opportunity to weigh in on this. If there's any comment. Go ahead. Mr. Kretz, go ahead.
If we do make any kind of motion in this direction, what intelligently can you digest in the next couple months? Because the hope is that my hope is that we fully fund the fire department next year. If we don't think it's practical, the question is, can we get on the path that we want to be on next year for 2 months this year? And I'm not saying we have to fully restore everything if you can't digest that and do it quickly. But what can you do? What would be a logical step in the right direction in terms of funding a safer fire department for the last 2 months, and recognizing all the discussion we had about whether response times are as good as they originally were said? We're obviously not going to be able to figure that out in the last 2 months. But we can say, okay, what can we do to improve response times in the next 2 months? So what's a logical next step?
If you're not aware of it, starting Sunday, we are implementing some modifications to our current deployment plan. And in conjunction with that, As you're well aware of, response times has been an issue facing the fire department more recently, and as a result, one of the recommendations that the fire chief would like to implement is to, as Pat McCosker mentioned, add 6 additional BLS ambulances on a V-staff basis, meaning that they would not be staffed for 24 hours, but on a 12-hour basis. These 6 ambulances would be distributed throughout the entire city, and what we looked at, again, since about 85% of our call load is emergency medical service type calls, we're looking at trying to augment those type of calls, taking into consideration in dispersing these ambulances throughout the city, looking at the number of responses in affected districts, number of responses in adjoining districts, number of BLS rescue type calls, and then, of course, response times. And based on that criteria, we looked at putting in 6 additional BLS rescues.
So if we had to look for the next logical step, and that's what I'm sort of getting at with this item, would it be taking those 6 ambulances and moving them from part-time to full-time? Would it be putting other staffing in different stations? Where would you spend the next chunk? If you were handed a chunk of money, what would you do to improve response times?
In terms of overall department operations, one of the other areas that the fire chief is concerned about is our overall EMS supervision. As you're well aware of, prior to the deployment plan, we had 14 EMS captains, basically 1 EMS battalion captain per battalion. With the deployment plan, that overall number was reduced to 7. The EMS captains play a critical role in maintaining our EMS service in terms of supervising our rescues out there, responding to hospitals during high activity level when some of our rescues get stuck in hospitals when there aren't beds available. They liaison with the hospitals to try and facilitate getting those rescues back out so they can respond to emergencies. They respond to multi-patient incidents and so forth. Those EMS battalion captains are again very critical to supervising our rescue ambulances. One of the other areas that the fire chief is looking at too from a firefighter safety perspective is trying to bring back some of our EITs. And also too, we're looking at possibly bringing back, if again, having the funding, looking at bringing back a couple of engine companies to bring our fire stations to a task force complement out in different locations.
Thank you. Just real quick, there was by the way, tomorrow on the city council calendar and the schedule, I believe we have a lot of fire issues and items for the fire department coming up, so a lot of these questions I'm sure are going to be asked again. On that, it appears that there was an oversight. The motion calls for this to be duly referred to both the Budget and Finance Committee and the Public Safety Committee, so I'd ask that it go to Public Safety as well as soon as possible with a request from this committee. And then one of the things that was not identified in this motion that I would ask is that the fire department work very, very quickly with the CAO to come up with where the revenue streams would come from to pay for this, because I think we're all in support of it. I also think that Pat McCosker said earlier that this is a Band-Aid fix, and I want to say that this is not even a Band-Aid fix. It's barely that from what I've heard from a lot of the firefighters, and it's not what you guys, in fact, are suggesting. This is the resources that were taken out, simply putting these 6 back in. They're not full staff, they're variable staff, but we don't know yet where they're going to be deployed. We don't know what type of variables, so we'd like to see what kind of report that is. But from what I've heard from some of the firefighters in the field as well, is that 6 is barely even enough, and depending on where they went, wouldn't even have an impact. And so I'd like to see where the revenue streams working with the CAO might come from, and what the variable means in variable, so in what shifts, and then where they would be deployed It's one thing we don't talk about is deployment, and then refer this over to public safety as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I guess in a technical sense, what the motion calls for is for the fire department to work with the CAO and the CLA in presenting a budget proposal to this committee and public safety. So we have to consider even whether we should present such a budget proposal. And I guess my thinking on it somewhat aligned with or building off of what Mr. McCosker said is that we have a limited amount of time now to try to get a plan in place and to implement it for the remainder of a fiscal year. And I'm wondering if our time and resources aren't better spent trying to figure out for 12-13 and beyond, and for the 5-year plan to fully restore fire services in a more thoughtful way, whether we might devote those budgetary resources going in that direction. So,
maybe I could make a more limited motion for us to consider.
Okay.
That we consider for the last 2 months of the fiscal year, restoring the 6 ambulances that are going to be restored part-time, to make that full-time, and to restore the 2 engine companies that were mentioned, and just limit it to that. I think that would still be a significant step in the right direction in terms of reducing response time and getting better coverage without really breaking the bank.
If I could ask that either way, it was asking for, I'll take a combination of what you both were saying. Either way, it's still asking for a report back to figure out those costs. I added to that figuring out where they would go, because I think the deployment part of it is just as critical. On top of the $7 million now, if it's variable and that's only half-time, it's probably got to be close to double that. You're looking at 14 or 15 million now for 2 months. And then the question is, still though remains, where would that revenue come from, or cuts from other departments? What would the CLA and CAO propose? So if you want to bring both of those back in conjunction with the long-term strategic plan of, if there's time, if you would say there is or isn't time to identify those resources and the revenue to pay for that, what would you suggest as the fire department moving forward? If it's going to take another month to come back with that plan and the council to vote on it, and we're at the end of the fiscal year and we're going to the next budget process.
Can we ask for that plan to come back to us next week in budget? Otherwise, it starts to become moot again if we wait a month.
If I may offer, today is April 16th. By the end of the week, the mayor will be releasing his proposed budget. Certainly, he's going to lay out some proposals on what to do with the department, whether there's restoration of services or not. But it's certainly going to give you a sense of where the mayor's position and where he's coming from and what he's looking to do with the department going forward. I think it would be beneficial for the committee to sort of take a look at that, digest some of that information, and certainly then discuss the policy issues, directions, things of that sort. It'll give you more of a framework kind of going forward.
Well, that was my thinking, because this isn't a 2-month issue. It's not even a 2-year issue. It's a going forward issue that we want to have a permanent solution for, not just a temporary one. Because if we do something piecemeal for the remainder of the fiscal year, who knows what impact that's going to have on the following fiscal year, where we might be trying to work out a solution next week in the context of the larger, budget discussion. So
it's an implication of the safety in the next 2 months. And the fact is, once we can more calmly deal with the issue on a more deliberative basis next fiscal year, that's one thing. Here, we recognize we're understaffed. We've had some problems. We may have had some deaths even as a result of it, and a lack of willingness to leave ourselves in that condition for 2 more months.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, in the short term, in terms of staffing the 6 de-staffed ambulances for the 2 months, so the department would be able to provide a report fairly quickly. We've already been working with the CAO and trying to identify funding for that 2-month period. So we can come back to you with a report on that.
So the challenge that we have is that we don't have a regular Budget and Finance committee,
which is why I was suggesting if you can, we can approve this, we can approve it out of this committee and move it to public safety, and it could be as soon as Friday or the next Friday. But at least we can get, and even if we have
But
that
we'll have to
special
come back,
meeting, we could do that.
could be, the next step will be at public.
So why don't we go ahead and do that then?
And then this committee can start focusing on the budget, which...
That gives the department a week or 10 days or so to do the more limited report, refer it to public safety for vetting on its impacts and deployment. I think that's a good way to go. So if that works for you, Mr. Kretz?
That'd be great.
And without objection, that would be the action of the committee.
And-
Everybody understand that?
Yes.
Just for clarification, restoring 6 ambulance for 24 hours and 2 engine companies for 24 hours for the balance of the fiscal year.
Well, the recommendation was to report on that to public safety, and then we'll determine the budgetary.
Give us both options.
Okay.
So, you know, Mr. Englander and his colleagues, including me, can consider the, not only the fiscal aspects of that, but also how that affects deployment as well. So, all right.
And just one last thing, just to echo Mr. McGosker's comments, the department is willing to work side by side with labor to develop a fiscally responsible grow back of the department, whether it be 3 or 5 years, but we are willing to sit down. We've had some preliminary discussions over a cup of coffee on how this would work, but the fire chief's goal is also not to do this in the event that we're going to have to lay off a lot of civilians. We want to be fiscally responsible.
Great. I think everyone can agree with that. Maybe we should make a fresh pot. So, all right. Is there anything
That is it,
further?
yes.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. We are adjourned.